Hey everybody, this is Joe Harper with Reformed Truther Ministries, and in today's video we are going to be talking about the Great Pyramids at Giza and specifically the underground structures that have been found under the Khafre Pyramid. So this one's going to be exciting today. So for those of you who haven't seen this already on the internet, there has been an explosion of new articles on the internet about a study that was done by these Italian researchers who were using SAR technology. So that's ground penetrating technology that uses sound waves, SAR, very similar to sonar. And these two Italian researchers, I got their names here, Corrado Malanga and Filippo Biondi, I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly, from the University of Pisa. These guys have used this technology in the past, and then they use this technology under the Khafre Pyramid, which is technically it's separate than the Great Pyramid, which is the largest of the three. If you know the Great Pyramids of Giza, you have the three big pyramids there, so this is one of the three pyramids. But I just want to make sure I get that right. It is not under the Great Pyramid; it is under the Khafre Pyramid. But these guys, they use this research and they put forward this and they released their findings in a paper. And what they found using this technology is they found what looks to be cylinder like structures that go as much as 4,000 feet into the ground under the Khafre Pyramid. And there are multiple of these structures. So 4,000 feet, if they truly do go that far down, that's about a mile down, which is pretty deep. And so the implications of this find, if true, would be very, very, very large. Now, there's a lot of theories going around on the internet about some people have said this is an underground city under there. Some people are saying that this is proving these are some type of structures related to the pyramid power plant theory, whatever else. And then some people more on the skeptical side are saying slow down, the we don't really know what we have yet, and some of the skeptics have pointed out that the paper wasn't peer reviewed, which I think is within reason is a fair enough criticism, but even some of the more credible guys have said, peer review isn't necessarily the gold standard. So and it's ironic because this study really came out a few years ago, but it really just came a buzz on the internet the past week or two. So it's very, very interesting. But I personally find this to be a fascinating find. And where I'm coming from is if these structures exist, and I mean, I've looked at a lot of the pictures on the internet are more depictions of it, but when you look at the actual image of the sound penetrating radar, I don't know what to make of what they are, but the one thing that seems fairly credible to me is that they're there. So that's really the question that I have is, okay, like before we get into all these theories about what these things are, let's just make sure we got our facts straight. Did they find what they think they found? Are these structures really under that pyramid? And based on what I'm seeing right now, it seems like yeah, they are. I mean, they saw what they saw, and I think that's really the starting point for this whole thing. And I find this personally very fascinating. I have a little bit of a bias for having an interest in this because I've been talking about the Great Pyramids for a few years now. I've been talking about what we've called the megaliths. We've talked about these amazing structures that are very, very old, and some of these structures around the world are even pre-flood. And what I have said multiple times on this channel, and I've said this in my writings, is that I believe that a lot of these structures they're older than the civilizations that mainstream archaeology says they are attributed to, and they also reveal that the technological knowledge of the civilizations that built these are far more advanced than what traditional historians would like to put forward. And if it is true that these structures exist under the Great Pyramids, it would only be more evidence of that. So this is a very exciting find. Now, the Great Pyramids, I just want to review some of the facts about it. The Great Pyramids at Giza are some of the most fascinating buildings in the world. They are astonishing. The more you learn about the Great Pyramids, the more astonishing you find them to be. When you study the architecture and the engineering of these buildings, they are absolutely fascinating. The mathematical precisions of the Great Pyramid of Giza, as an example, the largest of the three, it is a work of mathematical precision. The dimensions of that building, time and time again, come back to either the number pi or the golden number, which, if you know anything about math, these are two of the foundational critical bedrocks of mathematics, the pi and the golden number. They are so instrumental of so much about what we know about math and about our world as a whole. We even see these numbers in nature. It's very, very fascinating. So the guys who built the Great Pyramids, they obviously had some very advanced knowledge of the sciences. And there's other things about the Great Pyramid. When you go into the chambers, such as the King's Chamber, what's called the King's Chamber by Egyptologists, and you see the precision of the stones in that building, how there's no mortar, and many researchers, credible researchers, have said, well, we would struggle to replicate the precision inside that pyramid, even with our lasers and our diamond cutted saws and all the rest of it. And there's been documentaries made about that. And there's other things about the Great Pyramids that are astonishing, is that they do align under the stars of Orion, which is, the skeptics still try to say that's not true. It is true. And when you even look at the air shafts, some researchers have said that they go out to they point at various constellations of the stars, such as the star Sirius or or Orion or some of these other constellations. And once you go down the rabbit hole of studying the Great Pyramid, you really do realize that the narrative of traditional Egyptology does not hold up. There's a lot of alternative theories about the Great Pyramid, and these theories, the alternative theories, I've always been kind of agnostic about what they are. I've always said I don't know. Some people have said it's an astronomical observatory because, like I said, these air shafts that are called the star shafts. Some people have thought, some alternative researchers have claimed that it could be some type of an astronomical observatory. I'm like, okay, that's interesting, but one of the problems with that theory that I've always had is that uh, the amount of work that goes into that building doesn't seem to line up with the claimed purpose. Some people have said that it's some type of an energy power plant, and even said that it harnessed some type of electromagnetic energy. And I've never really ruled that theory out, but I don't understand it well enough to really come down and dogmatically say that's true. There are men who very eloquently defend that view, and it's very, very interesting. But I don't know. I think wisdom is knowing what you know, and it's knowing what you don't know, right? It's a very interesting theory. Some people have claimed that it's Joseph Granary, and that it was built for the famine described in the book of Genesis. I've never really leaned toward that theory. It just doesn't make sense to me based on the interior of the building. But there's a lot of alternatives. But no matter what you think it is, and I'm open to be convinced by the many different views, I'll tell you what it's not. And this is very, very true, is that it's not a tomb built for the pharaohs, built over a 20-year period by the Egyptian civilization. And I said this even before these pillars were discovered. I've said it for years and years, that I think that these pyramids were built far before the advent of the Egyptian civilization. And I think they are antediluvian structures. And there's really two credible theories about who built these things. One is that they were built by the Nephilim, by those giants and mighty men, that it is either fallen angelic or Nephilim technology, and that kind of overlaps. So the one theory is it was built by the bad guys before the flood, and then the other theory is that it was built by the godly Sethites before the flood, and that theory would say that the other theory is the good guys built it, and that they had a lot more knowledge than the people after the flood had. And even when you read the writings of Josephus, and I've quoted Josephus in my own writings, the books I've written, he believed that the pyramids went back to before the flood, and you can find that quotation from him in his writings. And he's a first century Jewish historian, so he was 2,000 years closer to the events than we are, and he held that theory, which at the very least indicates that there were people in the ancient world who believed that about the pyramids. But modern Egyptology, they say that the Great Pyramid, for example, that it was a tomb to the pharaoh Khufu. It was built over a 20-year period, and they think that the people who built it probably didn't even have the wheel. They think that they pulled these limestone blocks as heavy as a car from the quarry to the building site using ropes and pulleys. And they think that they built that extraordinary building in a 20-year period. 20-year pyramid. Now, you see what I did there? But the theory doesn't hold up. And I've said that ever since I've started this channel. And I even in private I've said that years before. I remember one story, and people have literally laughed at me about this, have been ridiculed about this. And I remember I was sitting at church at a potluck. This was some years back, and and I was I wasn't cautious enough. I was pretty open about this specific subject of the Great Pyramid came up, and I said, there's just no way that that is what they say it is. I said, there's no way that they built it without wheels over 20 years, and there's no way it's a tomb of Khufu. And I went through some of these, I started kind of spilling out some of these facts about the mathematical precision of the building and how it aligns with the stars and all the rest of it. And then one of the gentlemen there, he literally laughed at me and he ridiculed me. He said, "How do you know they didn't have a wheel?" It's like, I said, well, okay, if they had a wheel, it would certainly help explain the theory better. But even if you had it, it wouldn't explain how they built this thing in that time frame with primitive technology. You think they built that thing with ropes and stone chisels? It doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense. And I try. Obviously, the conversation ended graciously enough, praise God. But I was literally laughed at about that. And this discovery, if these pillars are really under the Khafre Pyramid, it's going to completely support and vindicate the theories of people who have been saying that these are not tombs of the Egyptian pharaohs. Whatever you think they are, I don't know what these structures are. I don't necessarily think it's an underground city. But it would only make what we already know about the pyramids to be all the more extraordinary. And that is why this is such a potentially significant find. Now, I think more research needs to be done. I think that this technology should be used again to replicate the process. And I think we need to make sure we have our facts straight before we move to the next step of theorizing. I mean, theorizing is fine, but we just need to make sure we know what we have before we take that next step. So I'm not coming out and dogmatically making any statements about what these things are. But it seems to me, at the very least, unless I don't have my facts straight, that these structures were found by this technology under that pyramid. And I do believe that that is significant. But I'll say what I've said before. Even if these structures didn't exist at all, even if this was a complete hoax, it would not explain away what we already know about the precision of these pyramids. That the people who built these pyramids had far greater knowledge of learning in the sciences than we can possibly imagine, because we are living in with a secular Darwinian view of history where they tell us that we evolved from more primitive species, and they believe that our ancient past was primitive technology and we've just evolved up to what we have now. And there are so many facts about the ancient past of our history that has been hidden from the masses. And alternative researchers, not all of them Christians, guys like Graham Hancock have said, look, there's clearly an advanced civilization that existed in the past, and it's going to shatter our paradigm of history. And a lot of Christian researchers, people in the Nephilim community, understand the truth of the megaliths. They understand the truth that these buildings are far more advanced than we can possibly imagine, and that the traditional theory that these were built as tombs does not add up. Now I want to read a section from my book here. Apparently the monsters are real. Just a quick paragraph, because what I want to show guys, and this isn't to puff myself up or self-aggrandize, but I want to read to you what I wrote before this story broke. When I wrote what I wrote here, I had no idea that this story was going to break, and it's simply because I already believed what I believed about the pyramids, and I simply have read what other men who have done far more work in this field than I have done, and I've simply read it and absorbed the information. But what I want to show you guys by reading this paragraph from my book, Apparently the Monsters Are Real, a crash course in cryptids, monsters, and other wacky stuff. The last chapter of my book is titled "The First Civilization." It's titled it's about the antediluvian civilization that built these buildings. And I want to show you that when you look at what I wrote in light of what's coming out now, it just makes it more credible. And that's what's really so amazing. So it says we now finally come to the remaining evidence for the first civilization, what I call the first civilization, the antediluvian civilization that existed before the flood of Noah. I said we don't have a ton of information about this civilization, but one thing we do have are the marvelous structures that they left behind. Some of the greatest buildings of antiquity are in fact antediluvian structures. These buildings are the mighty megaliths. While we are taught that later civilizations built these structures, the truth is actually far more interesting. For example, we are told that the Pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx were built by the Egyptian civilization. The Great Pyramids of Giza are believed to be tombs for Egyptian pharaohs. The Great Pyramid is said to be the tomb of the pharaoh Khufu. In actuality, the pyramids are structures that were built before the Great Flood. Careful examination of the Sphinx and the pyramids reveal that these structures have suffered from water erosion. That's quite a feat for structures in the desert. The evidence points to the fact that these structures are actually from an earlier time in history. And then I go on to list more reasons for why I believe that. Some of the things I just said in this video. So what I'm saying is not anything new, not by a long stretch. And there are guys who are far more well read on the megaliths who have articulated what I said. And they've been saying it for years and years and years. And there is a view of history that is hidden from the masses. And when I talk about this stuff, there's a lot of people, a lot of Christians, they just say I'm a conspiracy theorist. They just say, "Oh, you're just in this parallel world, Joe, and you're just not living in reality, and you just need to just drop all this stuff." If I talk about the Nephilim, we talk about the cryptids, the supernatural. If I talk about the first civilization, the antediluvian world, and all the evidence in the world isn't going to convince these people. So what I want to say here, I'm not saying this because I need to defend myself. I'm saying this because I really want to graciously challenge Christians to think about this stuff, that you need to understand that there's so much about our world that doesn't line up with the biblical, what we're told about our world, that doesn't line up with the biblical worldview. If you believe in this book right here, let me put it this way, the Holy Bible, and you believe in creation, literal creationism, 6-day creationism, you believe in the narrative of the book of Genesis, and you really believe that there was this whole world that existed before it was destroyed due to its sins, and Noah took the ark and he took his family, he took those animals, and the new world came after it. When you really believe that, there's so much reason to believe that the history of our world is so different than what we're being told. And what do I mean by that? There is the idea that this advanced civilization, which is this first civilization in history, and that all these later civilizations really are following in the footsteps of it, that is a far more, even though that is a completely paradigm shattering way to look at history, it is actually far more consistent with the narrative in our Bibles than believing that the people who built these structures were primitive people using stone chisels and ropes and primitive technology. It is far more consistent to believe in this narrative that these fallen angels came to the earth and they shared their knowledge with humanity, and it led to this explosion in knowledge in the antediluvian world. And then for the rest of history, we really are catching back up to where we were at the beginning. There is nothing new under the sun. There is nothing that will be that has not been before. And it says in the book of Daniel, knowledge will increase in the last days. And that's what's happening right now. Knowledge is increasing, and we are starting to see where we were before, and we are starting to catch up in many different aspects of knowledge to what was taught to the first peoples of humanity. This is an amazing time we're living in history, and that's why I'm a little fired up today. So please bear with me. But this is something where I pray that people see the truth each and every day, all aspects of truth. And the most central, important aspect of truth is the gospel. It is the narrative that Jesus Christ came to this world to die for sinners, and that salvation is through believing in Christ, believing in his truth, in his message, that he is God the Son, he is the Son of God, that he paid the price for sinners on the cross, that he died and rose again, in believing in these things and trusting in Christ for salvation, is our hope. That is the most important truth that we need to know. But there are many lesser truths that are all a part of the biblical worldview that give us greater discernment. And I pray that we see these things every day. This is what I do. This is why I do Reformed Truth Through Ministry every week. It's why I put out these videos, because I want people to see the truth. And what's going on with these megaliths, with these structures, is that the truth is people are finally putting the pieces together and saying, you know what, there's a lot more to these ancient buildings than we are supposed to believe. And the skeptics just say, nothing to see here, folks. There's no dots to be connected. There's no narrative to see. And they don't want us to understand that the ancient past is far different than we've been taught. So, like I always say, guys, don't take my own word for it. Do your own research. But there is a lot of great stuff that's been a lot of great work on the Great Pyramids that's been done. This is one book that's really, really cool. Secrets of the Great Pyramids by Peter Tompkins, 2,000 Years of Adventure and Discovering Surrounding the Mysteries of the Great Pyramid of Cheops. And, he goes into a lot of this stuff that I've talked about. So that's a great book that you can find. I think you can find it on Amazon. I have no affiliation with it, but it's a book I'd recommend. And he gets into a lot of the stuff of the, pi, the golden number, the precision of the building, talks about the air shafts, the star shafts. He talks about some of these theories that have been put forward, like the astronomical observatory theory. Like I said before, guys, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a power plant. I don't know if it's an astronomical observatory. I don't know what it is. But I'll tell you what it's not. It's not a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu. But what I do know is that I think it was built far earlier than the Egyptian civilization. I do believe that it was an antediluvian structure. That's what I know. Yeah, stay tuned, guys, for what's coming next with RTM. Feel free to check out my book, Apparently the Monsters Are Real, a crash course in cryptids, monsters, and other wacky stuff. I will leave the link to that in the Amazon store. It's a book mostly about cryptids, but like I said, in the last chapter, I do talk about what I call the first civilization, because in this book, I say there's a lot more to the subject of cryptids than just stinky Bigfoot in the woods. So all that being said, guys, stay tuned for what's next with RTM. This is Joe Harper with Reformed Truth Through Ministries. God bless everybody. If you enjoyed this video, then check out our website at www.reformedtruther.com.